Okay, we're back. Raimy, the Raimy Bini Podcast, episode, I don't even know, I think it's 9. This week is new. We're bringing on our first guest. So this is a big deal for us to actually have somebody to talk to other than ourselves and maybe actually expand the conversation besides the, what would you call it, the romper room that is the conversation that we have on a week-to-week basis. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent.
Okay, good.
I'm excited for our guest.
Okay, good. I got to tell you that I know you noticed that in the last episode, it was very heavily Raimy Rubin, which was good. You are not the only one to notice because usually I'm not someone who is, generally speaking, so quiet, but I did hear from a couple of people, some family members who were like, wow, you can stay quiet for an extended period of time and listen to other people talk. And I think that I do that generally because coaching world, I feel like you have to listen a lot, but I proved it. So it's possible. Anything is possible. And now that is as well possible. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, we'll talk about our guests in just a couple of minutes. Let's start as always with our good of the week. Yeah, I'll give you the floor to go good of the week.
Sure. So my good of the week this week is a company. It's a company that I've been paying attention to for a long time. The company's called Moshianic. And they are my good of the week because over the last 2 weeks, as of this recording, there's been a lot of conversation about in the philanthropy world about cuts to U.S. aid and federal funding getting cut. And it's something that there's a lot of confusion about. Things have gone back and forth, and there's been edicts that have been rescinded, and people are very unsure about the future. And depending on what sector you're in, there's a lot of panic. There's a lot of panic, and we're now in that we're still in that 2-week window where there's a lot of both confusion about what's happening on the ground and certainly uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. And I've been paying attention to those companies and individuals that are trying to get out in front of it and say, okay, here's how we're going to weather the storm. Regardless of what the storm looks like, we can start putting the precautions in place now to be able to weather it. And Moshianic just put together a really, really nice, what they call office hours for people in their community, where they have their 3 or 4 experts that are part of the company who are all just really seem like really, really great people, certainly extremely knowledgeable people, but they just seem like very nice, kind people. And they got together this group of people. The recording is available where people just fired questions at them about how we're going to get through this. One of the things that they said, just to go on a little bit of a tangent for a second, that I thought was interesting is we now, for better or for worse, have a playbook about how to get through crises. And depending on what sector you are and where you are, sometimes we have several playbooks, but the one that globally we have at our fingertips is COVID. We were able to get through that, and we were, and most fundraisers were able to get through that. There were definitely a lot of organizations I know that really, really struggled for the long term. A lot of people struggled in the short term, but we were just sort of looking at that playbook about what we learned from that crisis as fundraisers and what we can do to overcome it, and sort of start to apply those sorts of lessons moving forward, even in this time of uncertainty with what's going to happen with a lot of federal funding. So just shout out to Moshianic for getting out in front of it and being awesome leaders in the field.
Love it. I actually was going to go in the direction of U.S. aid as well, but I had a backup just in case because I wasn't sure where you were going to go. But on that point, we did, you and I did crisis fundraising conversations with people in COVID. I remember we opened it up to anybody, basically anywhere, and gave people free platforms to just do anything. I remember I spoke to a couple of organizations of Saharan Africa that were looking to raise money during COVID, emergency monies or situations where they were cutting and how to think about cuts and crisis. Yeah, I'm thinking about it a little bit based on what you said and based on just in general. I feel like there's a difference between cuts and outright just shutting things down. And in some cases, people are getting just shut down. They're closed. It's not like they're cutting the budget by X percentage. They're just gone. And they're stuck somewhere overseas and they have no way to get home. They don't know where to go. They don't have a job. They're in some cases in really precarious, dangerous places. And it's bad. It's bad on the ground for a lot of people. And in most cases, and I think a lot of cases, those people have not done anything wrong, nor are they looking to waste any money. So I appreciate Moshe and others trying to figure out how to mitigate or how to manage crisis in this moment, because I don't know if this is the right way to say that, but the public side of this storm is bad for anything connected to U.S. aid, let's say. But when you start to, pull apart, pull back on like the different layers and you get to real people getting hurt here.
Yeah. I mean, that's just one thing that I've been thinking about is with the Fed, not so much the USA, but with the federal funding getting cut, is a lot of the organizations that I deal with are not directly affected by federal funding. But that doesn't mean they're not indirectly affected by federal funding. Just as, like, for instance, that I think of right off the top of my head is a lot of the private schools that I've worked with do not receive any federal funding for their education. But a lot of the families that go to those schools might be on government funding for food or any sort of subsidy that they would be entitled to due to economic hardship. And those programs processes are at risk now. So that sort of becomes the school's problem in a lot of ways. I mean, it's indirect, but there's going to be consequences depending on what happens over the next couple of weeks and months. So we shall see.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go in a different direction and lighten the mood for just a second. You know me pretty well. I hate all things Philly sports. I mean, really, like, it burns deep. The Phillies, get under my skin to no end for an extended period of time in my life. It's really the Phillies. It's really not so much anybody. The Flyers don't have much to say there. And even the Eagles, for that matter. Like, my Jets are an abomination on their own, so they don't need the help of the Eagles to make that feel worse. And thankfully, the Jets aren't the Giants in this case, and Saquon wasn't theirs. But I want to shout out to the Eagles here. One, for a little bit slaying the dragon. I think a lot of people were happy that they won. I think additional people were happy in how well they played and how much they beat up the opposition here for a minute. All the conspiracy theories around the refereeing in the game. But beyond that, I want to also appreciate two things about them. One is what appear to be the quality of the people who are the stars of that team, just in terms of that sense of humility, that sense of focus on the group, the team. And that, to me, it was starkly clear a couple of years ago when they lost in the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts was very, I would say, I don't know what the right term is. He was very diplomatic on some level, but very respectful in handling defeat. And here on the flip side, in handling the win, he was exactly the same person, which I thought was a very powerful lesson in you can be a superstar, but you can still stay inside your own head and still be a human being. That was one. The other thing which I really appreciated, because this obviously worked out, they were getting a lot of flack a few weeks ago for sitting some of their players, especially their star running back who was on the cusp of, football immortality, for the idea that they were looking and focusing on the win and the long picture. And that, to me, was like a bold and perhaps precarious and dangerous idea to do at the time, but it worked out, right? And so they won. And so that move, sitting those guys, sitting him, not getting that record, for the sake of the bigger team win, was amazing. And then also crushing the Chiefs was amazing. So as much as I really don't like Philly sports, especially the Phillies, really the Phillies have been a pain in my side as a Mets fan for years and years and years. It's a good rivalry, but for a long time, the Phillies have just had the number. So kudos and a shout out and a bit of an applause for the Eagles here. Their coaching, their team, the way they operate as a group. Top to bottom, and in particular, those two specific things. So different than USAID and obviously less important, but worth mentioning here as well.
It is. As someone from Pittsburgh, I'm also very, very reluctant to give any sort of kudos or props to Philadelphia sports teams. Unfortunately,
is that a thing? Like, is that an East Coast Pennsylvania, West Coast Pennsylvania kind of thing?
It is, but we don't match up with them very often. It's AFC, NFC with the Eagles. The Penguins and Flyers have a rivalry dating back a bunch of years. We don't really have a baseball team, even if on paper we do. So I have nothing to say about the Pirates and Phillies. There's like a rivalry, but we play each other once every 4 years, so it doesn't really show up so much.
Is there like an in-state rivalry between the cities? Is that like a thing?
There is, but because of the Eagles and the Steelers schedules never lining up, it doesn't come to. We played them this year, and it was like a big deal, but like it wasn't a big deal. I don't know. But what I've come to realize is that when your team is not in it, you just root for chaos. Chaos is what we got when everyone's expecting the Chiefs to pull it out and the Eagles do.
Yeah, hope they can both lose, right?
Exactly. That would be the ideal.
That's always my thinking on some of these teams as well. Like, like Patriots, Giants is like, can they both lose?
Right.
And badly.
Right.
But as I said, like in the case that you have that about the Pirates, I have it about the Jets. Like, there's no way else to blame other than the team itself. And like, we can try to have some offload some of that onto opposition, but there's nothing there. So, okay, our guest has arrived. Let us welcome him in. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever on the Raimy and Bini podcast, we have a guest. Be our guest. Be our guest. Woohoo. Like to introduce you to Jeremy Stern. Rabbi Jeremy Stern is our first guest on the podcast. I call him the Happy Fundraiser, but we'll get into that as we go. And if you listen to any of the podcasts before, maybe you know this, Jeremy has the best in-camera setup of anybody that I know for Zooms, even though I know that just to the side, perhaps both ways, it gets a little bit hairy. Right inside the camera space, it's exactly perfect. If you're just listening to this and you're not watching it, you don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll do a screenshot and we'll put it up on LinkedIn. Jeremy,
Benny, you're sharing all my secrets here. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's not yours,
but all podcast,
It's not yours per se, but like if you look behind me, it's still hanging. Bride to be is still hanging above my shoulder there from a few weeks ago. It's the one remnant that's still hanging in the house from the wedding. So, but I set up here because every time I set up downstairs in my office, there are what look like gunshot holes in the walls, and I try to cover them with pictures, and it doesn't work. And on the other wall, like you saw a couple of times, is a bookshelf that was draped in a blanket for like 3 years. It looks bad. So good to have you here. Good to have your background here with us too. We can always learn from that as well. Raimy, welcome our guest.
Jeremy, welcome. You and I have met once or twice before. Yeah, for real. For real. Jeremy Stern is the Director of Partnerships for CauseMatch. I think, as Bini said, there's no real better introduction than being the Happy Fundraiser, the happiest fundraiser we know. It's a really good title and an appropriate title for Jeremy. So I sort of want to get us started just hearing your backstory, Jeremy. How did you get into the world of nonprofits?
Well, thank you guys. It's an honor to be here. And if I was cool enough to have Twitter or Instagram or anything like that, perhaps my handle would be the Happy Fundraiser, but I'm definitely not cool enough.
You should look for it. We should do it right now. Like, you should get it right now. Yeah, that would go well.
Yeah. Because if someone steals it and then tries to sell it to me, I'm not going to pay a lot of money for it. So, but thank you, Raimy. So just in terms of my background, well, how far back should we go? So I'm originally from LA, born and raised, and lived in New York for a bunch of years for college, graduate school, rabbinical school, etc. Made Aliyah, moved to Israel 12 years ago, just before Bini, but after Raimy, right? Is that right?
No. I have a complicated story,
right.
We'll go with yes for now.
There was a little back and forth. And in terms of my professional journey, so I was a weird kid. I have a feeling that the three of us were all weird kids. I know that Raimy was a weird kid. Maybe Bini was like the cool kid playing sports and things like that.
I like to think I was. I think my kids sometimes dispel the idea that I was cool as a kid, but hey.
Yeah. So I was a weird kid. And I remember one late, weekday evening, I was hanging out with a friend and we were talking about what we wanted to do with our lives. I think I was probably about 15 years old. And I said, I want to be a nonprofit executive director. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. You were definitely the cool kid in high school after that one.
I was happy, but so right. So I remember saying that. I'm like, you know what? And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get a master's in education because I knew a lot of nonprofits were schools, and I'm gonna get a master's in administration. I didn't yet know about MPAs or masters in nonprofit administration. I'm like, I'll get an MBA. And I'll get rabbinical ordination. I'll get smicha, and then I'll become a nonprofit executive director. That's what I figured were the necessary qualifications to do that, or the path that made the most sense for me. My parents had other plans. I come from a family of lawyers. None of those degrees are law degrees, so that was a bit of a divergence from the plan that my parents had set out for me. And when I was I was involved in youth groups and stuff like that in high school. And when I was in college, I started to get involved in a advocacy group that was based on our college campus, an organization called ORA. And I started off as an intern, and within 2 years, I was the executive director. But it was a small, scrappy, grassroots type of organization where the executive director meant that it was me and an intern. That was the sum total of the organization.
I'm the founder, CEO, I have all the titles, and there's nobody else around, right?
Correct. Right. So that.
Let me ask you. I want to dive in. I want to stop you for a second.
Okay.
How at 15 did you know any of those things?
You know what? The truth is that one of my best friends, his father was a nonprofit development professional.
Okay.
Paul Glasser, Moshe Glasser,
Sure.
and I grew up
Yeah.
together as best friends. And I was like, that's the guy who, that's the type of thing that I want to do. I didn't know what he did, right? But I just knew that he did good nonprofit stuff and some fundraising or something. And so that just made sense to me. Doctor, lawyer, accountant weren't speaking to me. So those things did.
Raimy, at 15, what did you want to do?
I was going to be a drummer. I mean, it wasn't even a question. I was going to be a professional drummer. I even knew I wanted to be a drummer for some singer where no one would. I didn't want the fame. I just wanted to play drums. So I'd be the singer. Be I always thought the drummer for Celine Dion. That guy's got to be an amazing drummer, right? But you could walk by the street, you wouldn't know who he was. So that was what I was going to be. I was going to be the next drummer for some diva. And that was going to be my life, not a nonprofit executive.
I did not know that we had that in common. I'm also a drummer.
There you go. I never said I was a drummer. I said I wanted to be a drummer. There's a very big difference between those things, my friend. Very big difference.
I did not want to be a drummer. I did not play an instrument. I did not want to be a nonprofit executive. I did not want to be a rabbi. Actually, at the time at 15, I wanted to be a senator. I had met the senator from the state of New York, Al D'Amato, at the time, and I found him.
That was in the 1880s? Was that?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah. If you met him, you would think that too, but something about him and his role and felt like he was important, let's say, in some way, shape, or form. Something about being a senator and there was a cachet about the term being a senator, which I thought was super cool, but that didn't happen.
Yeah. How'd that go for you?
I played him actually in a mock election a couple of years later. So I did get the opportunity to be a senator and lie my pants off in front of a very large audience. That was nice. But other than that, it didn't bear out. And I also lost a lot of respect for senators over the course of time, but that's a completely different podcast.
Yeah.
Back to you, Jeremy. Take us back inside Ohr.
So wait. By the age of 25, I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization. I'd fulfilled my life.
You hit your goal. Okay.
Exactly.
What is ORA? Tell people what ORA is.
Yeah. So ORA is the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot. At the time, it was a grassroots nonprofit. Now it's a bit more prominent, but still a relatively small nonprofit organization that advocates on behalf of women who are denied a divorce by their husbands in the Jewish divorce process, essentially advocating to eliminate abuse in the Jewish divorce process. Wow, I've not given the pitch for ORA in a long time. It's been a while, so I'm glad that I still have that in the recesses of my brain. I was at ORA for a total of 11 years, 9 of them as the executive director. And basically what I wanted to do is to build it up from a scrappy kind of extracurricular activity on the YU campus to a more formal and formidable nonprofit organization. So basically every year that I was there, we added another staff member. So by the time I left, we had obviously a much larger budget. We had about 8 full-time staff members. And that was 2018, right? When I left ORA. So, the thing is that okay, I did it, right? I had now been a nonprofit executive director for 9 years. And I was in my, how old was I then? Late 30s. And it was like, okay, what do I do now? Right. I was living in Israel. We'd already moved to Israel. And so we moved to Israel in the summer of 2013. And I was the director of ORA. And at first, we're like, okay, if I'm moving, across the world, I'm going to have to leave this position. And I was really the face of the organization, and had really been building it up. And so it was a core part of like who I was and my identity. And it's going to be really sad for me to leave that organization that meant so much to me. And we had this crazy idea of doing something that no one had ever done before, or that we hadn't heard of anyone doing before. This was 2013, and that is called working remotely, right? Yeah. So that was a new thing back then. And so I used Skype. Remember Skype? So I used Skype and a Google Voice number, and I was able to work remotely, and I was traveling regularly back and forth between Israel and the States. So I was working New York hours when I was home, and back in New York about a week a month on average. As I grew the organization, and I did this for 5 years, traveling back and forth, as I grew the organization, the demands for my time there in person grew. And so 1 out of every 4 weeks turned to 1 out of every 3, turned to every other week. And when I was traveling every other week, and my wife at the time was pregnant with number 5, she said, okay, it's time to look for something a little bit closer to home. So then I just started fundraising internationally for Israel-based nonprofit organizations, but not traveling as much as I was before.
Well, it does explain the 1K status, right?
Absolutely. 1K and Million Miler.
A million. Not only the Happy Fundraiser, the Million Mile Fundraiser. That could be your other tag.
My last year at ORA, I flew 175,000 miles. That's a lot, right?
That is a lot.
That's and like not business friends, right? This was an economy nonprofit seat. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They were nice to give me a glass of water, right? Like that's
a lot of miles.
Yeah,
that's a lot of miles. When you stepped into the role, how much did you know about fundraising?
Nothing.
And how much of your job as the executive director was fundraising?
Well, I was the only fundraiser for the organization, right? As the ED of a small shop, I wore many hats. So I was the ED and the director of development and the marketing director and the communications director and all sorts of other directors. I wasn't responsible for our programmatic efforts, right? Our casework that we were doing. I hired someone great for that who ended up replacing me as the executive director. So yeah, it was all new to me in terms of fundraising. And the truth is that so being on the YU campus, I was just exposed to lots of great people. And I had a regular meeting actually with Rabbi Kenny Brander, who at the time was the dean of the Center for the Jewish Future. And we had like a monthly meeting, and he was actually very gracious because he had regular meetings with this guy named Craig Dreilinger. Craig Dreilinger is an organizational psychologist and a coach, really, for nonprofit executives in the alphabet soup especially. Oh, you worked with Craig?
Yeah.
Amazing. So, you're like one of the first people that I've met who also knew who Craig is.
17 years ago, I worked with him.
So I was once meeting with Rabbi Brander, and Craig was there, also about to meet with Rabbi Brander right after me. Rabbi Brander turned to him and said, hey, Craig, I want you to meet Jeremy. He is a brand new executive director, doesn't know what the heck he's doing, but it's a really great cause. Would you do me a favor? Would you mind meeting with him once a month for the next year? And so I had an hour-long meeting with Craig once a month for a year. I learned so much more in those meetings that I learned in my entire MPA and, anything else that I learned in graduate school. Just having a real expert to bounce ideas off of and to learn from and to problem solve with, he was awesome. It was so, so valuable. So I learned a tremendous amount from him. But a lot of it, Raimy, just to go back to your original question, figuring out on our own, right? Like trial and error. We should send out some emails and do some mailers, like do stuff to make money and do parlor meetings. And let's do another parlor meeting to make a few more dollars.
That's how we met, right? We met at a parlor meeting, right?
Not only did we meet at a parlor meeting, you're being humble, Bini. You guys hosted a parlor meeting.
Yes, we hosted a parliament. That's true. Yeah. But it was in someone else's house. So I think it was...
Was it someone else's house?
Yeah. It was. We were part of the group that did like a thing for ORA time.
Okay, that's when you were wearing your rabbi hat.
That's back in the rabbi days. Yes.
Yeah.
That's when I was important as a rabbi in the community, and that people thought that actually meant something. So yeah,
Is
but it
it
was
a therapy session or is this
Oh, no. But I remember the event. It was, and Raimy, this goes right into your thing. It was not a fancy event. It was not like it was in someone's living room. It was like really grassroots. We brought our people, they brought their friends. You were there. Someone else spoke about their story, whatever it was. It was pretty like basic conceptually. And I think a lot of it, I was going to next, like, it felt like you get a lot of cover from the community because you're grassrootsing an organization on a really important cause, and sort of the hoopla around it, right, isn't important when it's at that stage of the game, right? Like I'm curious, when you went to meet donors, I'm sure they're not looking or thinking about like the grand nature.
Wait. I'm going to stop you already. Went to meet donors. You're assuming I went to meet donors.
No, I don't. I'm saying even later on, eventually you did.
I look back at what I was doing, and I wish I knew what I was doing then, right? Like, no one ever said to me, hey, Jeremy, you should call up people who've donated to you and like thank them and ask them why they gave. I was like, we sent them a thank you email. What's wrong, right? So, and this, again, is nothing against the organization. This was just my own ignorance about how these things are done and how you cultivate donors and how you develop those relationships.
So how did you learn? How did you learn to do that?
You know what? I think the best book that I read was The Ask by Laura Fredericks. I think that was great. Right, just knowing how to make a fundraising pitch. I remember reading that, and that was really instructive for me. Yeah, I remember sitting down with certain donors and just, putting together a proposal and making a pitch, right? Like I did that. But the whole donor cultivation piece, I didn't do, right? Like, we had board members and I expected them to donate every year, and we had board meetings every once in a while, and we'd remind them that last year you gave $5,000, so would you please renew your gift? That was it.
But it wasn't the thing, right? There was we went to the same school and the same rabbinical school, and like what you wanted to be with your dream as a nonprofit executive wasn't the thing there, right? That just wasn't. That was like the guys who didn't survive the rabbinate or education went into organizational work, right? And so they didn't teach it more than saying, oh, by the way, you should fundraise. Like there was no for guys who were going to be organization guys, right? It didn't exist.
Well, the truth is that when I started rabbinical school, they had just added a new program, which was they were revamping the professional training program. And so they actually started an organizational track. And so on Friday mornings, we would go around New York. Yeah. We'd go around. Yeah, seriously. And we would go around New York City, basically, and meet with different kind of alumni of the rabbinical school of REITs who were running major nonprofit organizations. So we went to the OU, we went to what's it called, the Metropolitan Jewish I'm blanking on, like Michael Miller.
Okay. Yeah.
What's the organization? I'm blanking on the name right now.
JCRC.
You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, whatever. Like just different Jewish nonprofit organizations and hear about their leadership and stuff like that. But there still wasn't anything on fundraising. That was more on like organizational leadership, but nothing on fundraising. Yeah.
And so then you learned in like the hard way. So hard lesson. Give me a hard lesson learned from your fundraising days.
Hard lesson learned.
Well, tell us the worst fundraising moment, because I love to stew inside people's worst fundraising moments. So, if you're okay to share that story here.
I need to think about that. I mean, the truth is that there is the part 2 to my fundraising career, which was once I left ORA, and this was this point 7 years ago. So, being in Israel, Israeli nonprofits like fundraising from America. And so having a guy who's fundraising in America, but they can pay an Israeli salary is a very attractive offer. So I worked first for Tzohar, which is a rabbinical organization in Israel. of religious Zionist rabbis. And so I was the North American Director of Development, which meant flying not every other week, but flying once every 4 to 6 weeks back to the States so I can keep my 1K status, right? That was important on United. So basically I lived trip to trip. I would organize a trip, reaching out to previous donors, current donors, prospective donors, organizing parlor meetings like I had done before, and when reaching out to donors, just want to take people out to coffee or meet them in their offices or whatever, and update them and pitch them on the work that we were doing. I then have the trip, and then a follow-up from the trip, and then prepare the next trip. Like, that's really what I was doing. After being there for about a year and a half, I moved over to Ohr Torah Stone, which is a network of primarily educational institutions in Israel. And I upgraded from the North American Director of Development to the International Director of Development. Same role, but it's a little bit of an upgrade. And because I was just fundraising from North America. I was there for a few months, and then the pandemic hit, and then it was, just kind of figuring things out. I became responsible for the virtual gala, right? They do a dinner every year, Ohr Torah Stone in New York. And obviously in 2020, they were not going to have an in-person dinner in New York. So I led the virtual gala. I was there for about a year and a half, and then joined the CauseMatch team in early 2021. I think it was. Yeah. Early 2021, I reached out to Joseph Bornstein, who is the founder and CEO of CauseMatch. And I said, hey, Joseph, we've worked together for 5 years together. I'd been a client, right, of CauseMatch at the various places that I'd worked. Bini, in fact, was my coach, and Raimy, in fact, is my copywriter. And I said, let's consider working more closely together. And 2 months later, I joined the team. So,
in what capacity? What do you do for them?
At CauseMatch? Yeah. Director of Partnerships, which means I manage our ever-growing network of nonprofit fundraising professionals who are involved in the work that we do in coaching campaigns and in connecting their clients with CauseMatch. Yeah.
And just take people inside, like, we know, both of us know what that is, but explain that out. Like, why is that a thing? What was that necessary? What was the logic behind developing sort of a partner network?
Did I get out of my worst fundraising
for the moment? If there's still time, we may come back. We may close with a killer story. But for the moment, as you know, it's going to be like, I've been thinking about when we have guests, what kind of questions to ask them. And their worst fundraising moment has to be part of that list of like questions of that, because I think they're so instructive and they're horrible. And they also make people feel better about themselves when they hear them. Like, oh, mine wasn't so bad. So, but no, just take us inside the partnership.
I think my story, though, might involve you, Bini. And I think if you recall that story, we'll get there. Just to see that a little bit, give a little intrigue.
I'm not afraid, but just take us inside the partnership piece, because having been a coach at the company, we can appreciate what coaching is at the company, what we did, and the small team of coaches that we had. But bring on sort of the whole idea of this partnership track piece that you're running.
Sure. So thank you. We really have two different types of partners. We have referral partners, and that's pretty common in tech companies and really in all sorts of businesses to have referral partners. That's a bit more transactional, where it might be a marketing professional, graphic designer, or a videographer who they're working with clients, and they have a client who's a prospect to run a crowdfunding campaign. They'll make that introduction to CauseMatch. And sometimes we'll make introductions to them. So there's a bit of a two-way street there. That's a referral partner, and that's a pretty simple transactional type of relationship. What we offer, which I believe is quite unique, I don't know other companies who have this type of integration, is what's called an implementation partnership, where the partner is not just doing their thing over here on the side and we're doing our thing, on our side, but rather we're really integrating and implementing campaign work together. Something that we offer at CauseMatch, in addition to the technology of our platform, is support and strategy. And our strategy is really robust. Our playbook was developed by a guy named Vinny Marilis, who worked on it for a few years. There you go. Take a bow. And so what we do is, when working with nonprofit fundraising professionals who become our partner coaches, we train them in our strategic model, and then they can coach their clients through CauseMatch utilizing our playbook, our campaign strategy. And so they really become a part of the team when working on a campaign together. They're not just doing their marketing thing on the side while we're doing our thing, but rather they really become a part of the team in implementing these campaigns with their clients.
And when you're pitching that, how are you pitching that to somebody to make that make sense to them?
Yeah, sure. So number one, it's another tool in their toolbox in the services that they can offer their clients. But really what that means is that it's a new revenue stream for them. If up until now, they've been working with clients on strategic planning and board development and capital campaigns. Now, another service they can offer their clients is strategic crowdfunding campaigns. So it creates a revenue stream. We have a revenue share model with our partners, depending on their involvement in the campaign. They receive potentially a significant portion of our revenue for both bringing the client to CauseMatch and coaching the campaign with CauseMatch. So there's a business development piece of it, which is, thank God, very successful and attractive to our partners. Yeah.
Awesome. Raimy, your mic is off.
You, in a lot of ways, Jeremy, are coaching the coaches. You're giving them the playbook to be able to go and execute. Do you feel like I guess in your role in that, what have you learned in that shift coming from, you had 9 years of executive director experience, you had X number of years in international roles as a fundraiser, and now you're in this new position where you're coaching coaches to go and run crowdfunding campaigns. For you, was there a big learning moment? Is there a mindset shift that you needed to have when you entered this role at CauseMatch that differed from your roles previously in your fundraising efforts?
It's an amazing question. I think what I learned from it, I don't know if there's one particular point where I recognized this, but I learned that I didn't know how much I didn't know. That's really what it comes down to. That was the first half of our conversation here, which is I did not know how much I didn't know. And only when I came to CauseMatch and laid out for me was this amazing campaign strategy, which was really thought out and being developed over years and experience from hundreds and hundreds of campaigns. I'm like, wow, I did not know any of this when I was running these campaigns through CauseMatch. And now I understand what Bini was trying to get us to do in coaching us in those campaigns. And now I get what Raimy was doing in writing our campaign copy. So I did not appreciate how much I didn't know up until I really was in it and saw it. But then the next piece on top of that is once I started doing it for a while and supporting coaches in many campaigns, I stopped to appreciate how much I knew. We tend, as coaches and as fundraising professionals who've been doing this for several years and developed an area of expertise, we don't always appreciate our expertise. We take for granted the nuances and the skills that we've developed. And I'll share things with partner coaches, especially newer partner coaches, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that. I'm like, okay, that wasn't a major mind-blowing insight for me. It's not because I'm such a genius. It's just once you've seen it many times and done it a lot of times, you start to appreciate, you don't realize how much you know. And then when you start working with coaches, those gems start to come out. The other piece that I'll add, and this actually was really insightful for me, I'm typically supporting our coaches, as you said, Raimy, coaching the coaches in coaching campaigns. Rarely am I working directly with a client. I've only had that experience a few times where really not on a paid level, but really volunteering for local organizations where they might be running a CauseMatch campaign and I'm supporting them and meeting with them in a way that I wouldn't for a regular client. And I remember sitting with a board of a local organization, and they said to me, and this was really like a strategy session. This wasn't even around a campaign. It was about their organizational strategy and their mission and what they're all about and where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And they asked me to come and be a part of the conversation, which was really interesting. And there were such great ideas and great questions that I shared and questions that I asked. And I left the meeting like, where did that come from? I hadn't prepared. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't done it before. But I guess once you've really experienced coaching and supporting so many different clients, you start to see some patterns and then you can share that with individual clients. Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Have you had that experience before?
Happens all the time, but like I try, I get lost in it because, and maybe you have this too, I find myself coaching the wrong conversations also, where it's just a regular conversation with somebody and I should turn the coaching hat off and I can't, and I'm coaching this conversation. It's like my kid and he's like, dude, stop coaching, just be a dad for a minute, that kind of thing. But it's not just that, it happens in other places too. I used to have this when I did synagogue work, when I wasn't the rabbi in synagogue anymore, but I was going to synagogues and working with rabbis and boards and things like that. Every synagogue I walked into, I would find all the problems and all the holes and all the gaps and all the issues. And it was bad. Like I couldn't just not be the consultant in those spaces. So, but yeah, I know every time someone reaches out to me now, who's a nonprofit person or a board person, I sort of know what that conversation is going to be. And I know what they're expecting from me going into that conversation. At the beginning, I didn't. At the beginning, I was like, why are they calling me? And I'm like, oh, okay, now I know why they're calling me. And so, yes. And then I think, just like you said, the things that are obvious to me or obvious to you as questions or concerns or issues, for them are like novel concepts. And I think that's part of you sort of living in it for so many days, weeks, months, and years. We forget like, oh, the things that, we didn't know when we started. Like I was going to ask you about this because you and I talked about this a lot, which was like the data side of fundraising, which I would say that as much as I thought I knew about data and thinking about data and donor data specifically before I worked at the company and did it every day of my life, I know infinitely more about the data side of it, right? I imagine you have the same experience.
Yeah. Well, let me add one piece before we get into the data point, which is as you were talking, I remember the question that I asked them, which they were just like, wow, what a question. And the question was, what would the world look like if your organization closed its doors tomorrow? That's not an amazing question. It's not like a mind-blowing question, but it was the right question for them. They were so focused on the weeds and like, last week we did this program and this next week we're doing that program. And aren't we going to have this speaker or that speaker? And I just was able to take a step back and provide that perspective. And I was like, where did that come from? But it just, from all of our conversations, especially with the two of you, that just emanated. Yeah.
Raimy, have you ever asked that question to somebody?
It is not worded that exact way, but it's on the intake form that I collect before I start working with clients. The way that I see it is not quite as extreme as the way that Jeremy phrased it, but I really like the way that Jeremy phrased it. But it's more to get to the individual level of what does that world look like for people before they come into your organization. That I think gets at the same thing. I like the drama of Jeremy's question, so maybe I'll start to use that. That's good. But yeah.
I remember getting asked that question the first time an uncle of mine asked me that question about a job that I was pursuing. He said to me, if that organization closed tomorrow, would anybody notice? And I was like, ooh. But I was like, but I need a job. He's like, I get that you need a job, but like, okay, you could get a job somewhere else. Is there something specifically like that they do, and it was such a hard conversation, but the question is like a showstopper, right? It's just like, everyone's like, wait. And some people, it's like offended by it as a question because they just assume that they have a value and a purpose in the world. But it's such a power question and it has such opportunity for great conversation in the room around the people. And you get sometimes to spaces where people on some level realize, oh, maybe we don't need to exist. And we need to either find a reason, ignore the question, or, just close up shop. No one, we all know no one's closing up shop anytime because they don't have an answer to that question. But it's like, it's such a power question. I love it.
Awesome. Now, getting back to the data question. So
yeah,
you asked about, clarify the question again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I picked up in doing campaign coaching at CauseMatch, peer-to-peer, all that other stuff, was really getting inside donor data, organizational data, and just a way. I wouldn't even say a different level. It's a completely different universe of understanding and appreciation about what's actually going on inside an organization. I always say that the money lives inside the data, right? And I joked about swimming in the data And that if an organizational leader would go swimming in the data with me, they would learn a ton about themselves and about their organization and about where the potential money lives. And that was so revelatory. Even though I was raising money from people and I was asking people and we were doing okay before that, this whole world had sort of opened up from the sake of doing campaigns. So I'm curious if your experience was similar, or what exactly from the data side of it you picked up that maybe an executive in an organization now is missing.
The only data that I thought about when I was working in organizations was, what do we have to report on for grant applications and grant reports, right? And what are our kind of accomplishment talking points, right? We've impacted this number of individuals, families, or what have you. That was just those high level numbers. But on a fundraising level, it wasn't even a topic of conversation. It really just wasn't. I mean, we had our live bunt lists, right, of last year, but unfortunately not this, right? People who had donated previously. That's a certain level of data. In most cases, it was stored in spreadsheets, and I was combining spreadsheets together. But yeah, it wasn't even something that we were analyzing. I wish I had a coach who would work with me when I was there to dive into that and identify what are the greatest sources of potential new revenue for the organization. Who are the donors who we should be focusing on? We have limited time and resources. Who should we be cultivating? All of that. Yeah, and that just wasn't there.
And now that you're on this side of the table, how do you answer those questions? How do you help organizations figure out who those potential sources of revenue are, where they should focus their efforts?
That's a great question. The truth is that I'm rarely coaching clients directly, and certainly not.
But you're coaching coaches to help. You're coaching coaches to help them find that information.
Yeah. But again, limited within the context of a campaign. I think the data becomes really valuable. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys feel differently, but the campaign is really focused on a certain data set. And yes, if you're talking about different layers of donors, different groups of donors, whether it's your matchers or your mid-tier donors or your regular crowd donors, okay, so you need to dive into that. I think that the juiciest part is post-campaign. Now that you have this new data set of 1,000 new donors, what next? Right? What do you do with it now? That's where there's the most juice to squeeze, I would say, from the data. Bini, what do you think about that?
No, I mean, I say to people all the time, the work starts after the campaign is over, and you think you're done, but you're not done. You just started, because now you have so much to just sort of to wade through and to learn about what you learned. Right. And to learn about what you learned from what you learned, kind of a thing. Like, it's like 3 steps. If it's the flip of what you said before, the things I didn't know and the things I didn't know is to learn from the things that you learned and pick all that stuff up, because there's a ton going on. And the best leaders in organizations, in my experience, are the ones who did the event, they did the campaign, they raised the money, and now as much as they're exhausted, they're excited to dive in and do the next part of it, which in many cases separates them from the pack in terms of how impactful, how good, how successful they're going to be. For sure. I think what you're saying is dead right. 100%.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. Now I want to get back to the happy part, because
I'm still waiting for the big reveal, but okay, fine. You want to get to the happy part?
No, there are very few. Raimy and I've talked about this before, and I've talked about this in other places with other people. There are very few people who in the space of fundraising continue to smile after so many years of being fundraising. And you know that when you see them, you're like, oh, that guy's a fundraiser, and she's a fundraiser, because they just feel defeated and down and sad. I sort of, it's a multi-leveled kind of question. Is one, how do you keep the energy level up for it? 1, 2, how do you not let it sort of get you down, let's say, or maybe it does and you don't let it, or you figure out a way. But how did you sort of, as a frame, and I say it jokingly, but that term is, there are very few people that I know in the space who get from them the vibe of being very happy about doing what they're doing and enjoying it at that level. So like I think it's important, because as I say all the time, like you said it before, Raimy and I have talked about it too, very few people get in it to go do that. You've already established that at 15, you wanted to do that. But even once you started to do that, you still did it. Like, it didn't deter you or push you away or move you in a different direction or think about doing something else or, So I really want to get in there because I think it's important for leaders and organizations to figure out how their happy place in the work that they're doing, let's say on some level, but also figuring out how to maybe pick up some of the genius of Jeremy Stern in the fundraising space and apply some of that to themselves from the happy side.
Well, I think it's two things, and thank you for the kind words that you said about that. The first is I'm an extrovert's extrovert. I get energy by engaging with people, and so that's something that I run towards. So, and related to that, and this is maybe just like a quirk of me, I love awkward conversations. I love like marinating in that awkwardness. And there are few things more awkward than saying, Raimy, would you consider supporting this program for $50,000? Silence, right? That silence. Oh, the awkwardness. It's delicious. Love it. It's thrilling, right? So yeah, like that's me. And so maybe that's why I enjoy it so much. But the other piece is the perspective that I have to fundraising. And this absolutely is not my own insight. Everyone talks about this, but the way that I say it, and I'll say it both in Yeshivish and then I'll translate into English for the variety of listeners.
Yeah.
That the role of a fundraiser is to serve as a shadchan between Baalei Tzedakah and Baalei Chesed. And so now translated.
You have to translate every word of
Okay,
that.
right? The role of a fundraiser.
Even the transcription service is like, what was that? What language
was
that?
So the role of a fundraiser is to serve as a matchmaker between people who want to change the world and those who can actually make it happen, right? Between those who have the capacity to make a difference, right? The philanthropic capacity, and those who are on the ground and actually can implement it. And so if, people are dating and Bini, you just married off a daughter, right? If someone's suggesting a match for a single individual, and they think it's a great match, you should really meet this person, you guys should go out, you're not going to be hesitant to make that suggestion if you think it's a great idea. And so what I'm doing when I'm approaching a prospective donor, I'm providing them with an opportunity. I'm not a schnorrer. I'm not asking for favors. I truly believe I'm giving them an opportunity. And they want to turn it down, that's like at their own peril. They're missing out on this opportunity, and we will find another donor who will take that opportunity. But I've seen it, that there are people who are blessed with tremendous wealth, and they want to make an impact in this world. They want to make a difference. And there are people within nonprofit or organizations who are making that change on the ground. And you can bring these two sides together. That's the role of the fundraiser, to bring those people who have the capacity, the philanthropic capacity to drive this change, and those on the ground who are actually making the change happen. And so you're a matchmaker between the two. You're bringing the two sides together and providing them with an opportunity. That's how I look at fundraising.
For me, you just answered a question that I was trying to figure out in my head how to ask you, because one of the things that was going through my head as you were talking and telling your story is, how were you so successful throughout those years as an executive director without knowing anything? Staff member every single year is no small feat. That's fundraising a lot of money, and yet you're telling me that you don't know how to fundraise. Well, apparently you were doing something right, and I was trying to figure out what was he doing right this whole time. He didn't understand donor cultivation, but like what I'm getting to now is that I think that foundation, that mindset that you just laid out for us now, that you are giving people that opportunity to do something that they actually want to do. They want to make the world a better place. They want to alleviate the pain and suffering of the service recipients that are being helped at the end of this journey. Just having that mindset is, I would imagine, goes a huge way in laying the groundwork for being a successful fundraiser. Everything else is strategy and tactics, and there's better and worse ways to do things. There are obviously lots of best practices out there, but coming in with that mindset itself must have been a tremendous advantage. Just like that gives you a leg up, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. As you're talking, I'm thinking back to my role when I was the executive director of ORA. And then when I shifted over to these mid-sized organizations raising millions of dollars, at ORA, I was responsible by the time I left to raise, that's what our budget was, about $600,000 for the year. No one was getting rich working at ORA. I had more individual donors at ORA than one of the organizations that I was then fundraising for that had to raise 10 times as much but had fewer individual donors. So I was doing a lot on the small donor side. We created this robust, broad base of donors. And Raimy, to add to your point, I wasn't doing the major donor cultivation in a significant way. For us, a significant gift was $500, and like a major gift was $5,000. And we're talking major gift was $5,000, and a few people giving $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And so, but my focus had really been having lots of $100 donors and $360 donors, and that's what we were able to do. We had thousands of donors supporting the cause.
Amazing. Which also goes to show you that you certainly don't need to be a major donor in order to have that desire to change the world and in fact to contribute to changing the world. Like I think it certainly works on the larger dollar amount spectrum, but it works just as well.
Yeah. You want to? I'll just add. I know we've been going on for a while, so this is going to be a long episode. But I remember my first few years as the executive director. There is something called the YU Sfarim sale, which is a annual big book sale on the Yeshiva University campus. And so we would have a table for ORA outside the YU Sfarim sale, and it basically went on for about 3 weeks, every night, almost every night of the week for about 3 weeks, and we would sell raffle tickets. And so I would stand there for hours, 3 weeks straight, every night, selling raffle tickets for, what were we selling them for? $10. And I think that you could buy, budget tickets for $25 or something like that. And we made like $15,000 from it. And it was amazing, right? But I look back on that, I'm like, wow, I spent scores of hours selling raffle tickets and made $15,000. And it was a lot of money for us. And like, I would walk back to the office with like wads of cash, and like a big night.
And if you know where Yeshiva University is, then that is no small statement right there. That is
exactly.
Right.
But it also it started to create our donor base. And we were collecting contact information for these donors, and we started emailing these donors, right? We weren't doing much more than that, but we were emailing them, and some of them started giving to our seasonal campaigns, our end-of-year campaign, our Rosh Hashanah campaign, things like that. So it was really valuable from that perspective, from a donor acquisition move. We've now learned that there are other types of campaigns that you can do to create a broad base of donors that doesn't require spending hours on end at the entry of a book sale to sell raffle tickets.
We're moving into like a little bit long in terms of how we do these episodes, but I want to, because we have a guest, we have to ask them what become like a thing, like a rapid fire set of questions. So let's get at it here as we almost close this out. My first question to you is, what's one thing about the work that you do now, the digital fundraising specifically, that people get wrong that you like to, explain to them to get them to understand it better?
That the purpose of the campaign is not to market your organization. It's not to show a bunch of videos, right? It's not anything like that. The purpose of a fundraising campaign is to fundraise. And that's what you need to keep your eye on the ball. It sounds simple, but when you're in it, organizations get so much in the head of like our video and our graphics and our this and that. And I'm like, forget about it, right? Focus on what's going to bring in the money.
Good one.
Raimy, if you could give one superpower to fundraisers, what superpower would you give them?
One superpower to fundraisers. It doesn't need to be like a X-ray vision type of superpower, or it could just be
your call.
I'm just going to say lack of fear and anxiety. That's what holds people back. It's just that fear and anxiety of rejection. And just be bold and go for it. and give people that opportunity to give.
I got to ask that in that space, just when you got no from a donor, right? How did that sit with you?
Crushing.
Because you talked about being like the matchmaker thing and the whole vibe. So what was that word? Say it again.
I said crushing. It was crushing. Look, Raimy, you were generous in saying that I must have always had this attitude towards fundraising. I think it's something that developed over time. And I remember certainly my early years, it was crushing. And so I am going to give the reveal, Bini, of the question that you asked before of my worst fundraising story.
Which I knew we'd get there. I figured we'd get there.
Which you were involved in. I've been wanting to share it. And we're coming up almost on an hour. So I really...
Be careful. Be careful.
Well, I am going to try to say it while protecting the innocent and the guilty.
Yeah.
Actually, at that parlor meeting that you ran, you introduced me to a prospective donor, and they were willing to take a meeting, and I pitched them on the biggest ask I'd ever made at the time was 25. I was shaking in my boots, right? Coming up to their beautiful, beautiful house and sitting there poolside, right? Sharing with them the proposal that I'd put together. And they're like, this all sounds good. Follow up with me. Sounds great. I gave them some of our marketing materials, including a brochure. And it looked like we were going to nail this. We were going to get $25,000. At the time, maybe our budget was $250,000. This was a huge gift for us. And I followed up and followed up and followed up and followed up and got absolutely zero response. Absolutely zero response for days and weeks and months. And then eventually it came out through someone who reached out to them, who was connected with them, who said that they saw something in our brochure, a certain person who they had a very bad experience with previously, and they're like, if ORA has that person in their brochure, we're not giving to them. And that was it. I'm like, because of a picture of some guy who showed up at a rally, that's why you're not giving to us? But indeed, that's what it was. But you know what? People are people. I was crushed by that. That was just like so hard because I also knew the impact. Raimy, we could talk about donor impact. I knew the impact that their gift would have on the organization, on our growth. And that was so disappointing. But you know what? Like they'd gone through a painful experience with this individual. And so they just it didn't feel right for them.
Yeah. No, I remember it more now as you say it again. Yeah, and as a Grim, just to give it a context for the donor, that donor could have easily doubled Jeremy's budget on the spot.
Oh, I couldn't imagine asking for more than $25,000.
No,
right?
just
I could have asked for $250. Yeah.
The scope of the donor potential in that case over the long term, short term and long term for ORA would have been just monumental. And then it's something you can't, right? You can't prepare for everything. Like one of the things that I always come out of that story for me is like, it's a brochure. Like, okay, like you can't, like you're going to nitpick the pictures in the brochure to make sure that every person in there is, well, now you could do it with AI, you could fake all the pictures. But back then, like it's legit people who were at an event and like you're standing next to somebody and they're there, whatever. And it's so like deflating.
Yeah. Let me add one other point. As you were speaking, it reminded me, and maybe this will be one of the last things that we'll share here, which is I couldn't imagine asking for more. It was just beyond my field of vision, right? Like this was a huge gift for us, $25,000, and it reminded me of a similar conversation, or a conversation that I had. We were writing a grant for a foundation. And one of the board members on the foundation was guiding us. We were meeting with her, and we were, again, going to ask for like $10,000 for this grant. And she's like, you need to put a proposal together for $20,000 or $30,000. And we're like, what? It doesn't cost that much. He's like, no, you need to expand your scope. You need to think about what does it look like to scale, to build up, to do it twice as big. And that was really instructive for me. That was really formative, that conversation. Because I was just like, this is our program. This is what we want to do. We want to do some events in your community. It will cost us $10,000. And she's like, what could you do for $30,000? And that was a great question.
I got one last question, and then we're going to cut it. And it's not necessarily a short question, but it can be short if you'd like. If you are standing in front of a room of professional fundraisers, executive directors, directors of development, resource development people, all those people, and you had 30 seconds to talk to them, what are the drops of wisdom that you would give them in that 30 seconds?
I think I'd share some of the things that I shared already about
what additional item that you haven't shared yet.
That I haven't shared already. Oh,
that was a setup. Like I knew you were going to do that and try to weasel your way out of the answer. And so I knew that was going to come, and I want to follow up with you got one shot, one piece of wisdom that Jeremy Stern is like, and people are like, well, but Jeremy Stern said the following thing. That was amazing. Like, fill in the blank.
Well, I've already said one. So now I have the second piece of wisdom that I have to share with them. What I've learned at CauseMatch on the business side has been eye-opening. That nonprofits suffer from a scarcity mindset where it's about how little can we spend and how little can we invest in our growth. The shift that needs to happen is to think like a business, right? Nonprofit, it does not mean that you can't make profit. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be trying to grow as an organization or invest in your growth. If anything, you need to be growing on a scale that's much greater than so many for-profits are, because you're changing the world and not just selling clothing or a soft drink or something along those lines. And so taking that approach of saying we need to have that growth mindset. We can't be scared of overhead, can't have this scarcity mindset, but to recognize to make money, you got to spend money. And if you have two options, either we spend $0 or we spend $100 but make $10,000, or we spend $10,000 and make $100,000, option B needs to be your choice. And so many nonprofits will say, no, but we can't spend that much. We'd rather only spend $100. Maybe that's what your board members say, but what do the people who are so desperate for your services, what do they say? What are they going to be more grateful for? That you have $10,000 to spend on solving the need that needs to be addressed, that your organization is so excellent at addressing, or that you net $90,000 to do that and to make a much greater impact in the community. How's that for my 30 seconds? Second point.
That was a rabbinic 30 seconds. Like you got like 2 minutes out of that 30 seconds. It's always dangerous to give a rabbi a mic. No, that was great. It was great. Thank you. We will leave it there, Jeremy Stern, Happy Fundraiser. But no, thank you for joining us today. Being our first guest, we will always remember you as our first guest.
I'm so honored. So honored.
Appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, guys.
Take care.